Alrighty, everyone. This is meteorologist Timmy Albertson here with you guys. And well, for those of you who are watching last night's weather chat, you remember that we were taking a look at some strong storms that were developing across central Michigan. Unfortunately, you may also remember that the internet cut out right when we had the possibility of a tornado near Grand Rapids, Michigan. So I'm going to take a moment to explain to you what you missed on the radar scans. So with that in mind, what we're going to do is we're going to flip over the screen here, and you're going to see that there are two different types of radar imagery here on the screen. You see two of them there. Well, the one on the left is called a correlation coefficient, and the one on the right is called relative velocity. So basically, with the correlation coefficient, what's happening is the radar is kind of measuring the size of the objects that it is detecting within a certain little small area. So in that case, it's generally rain, and raindrops are usually the same size. But when we have a tornado on the ground and we start picking up debris, well, the radar is now suddenly measuring different size objects there. So the correlation coefficient, which for those of you who know statistics, the correlation coefficient is the amount that things are similar. So when we start getting different sized objects, and the radar is picking that up, well, the coefficient begins to drop down. We're not seeing not everything is the same size. Now, on your right, you have the velocity radar image, as we talked about last night. We use this in weather for two things, and that is to look for strong winds, but also for rotation. So basically, the green colors that you see on your right there are winds that are going towards the radar site. Red colors are winds going away from the radar site. Now, when we start to see kind of high values of those right up against each other, it's kind of an indication that there might be a little bit of rotation. So the first radar scan you see here is from around 8:15 Eastern time. We were tracking a burst of gusty winds, which were probably around 50 to maybe even 60 miles an hour, just to the north there of the Walker area. Now, these gusty winds likely added enough low level wind shear that on the northern edge of that burst of gusty winds, we began to see some rotation. Now, there are a lot of things likely going on, and I'm not going to get into the scientific explanation as to why, at least for right now. But as we advance over towards the next radar imagery here, basically what you're going to start seeing is a little bit of a signature that there's probably a tornado on the ground. So let's take a look here. We advance this forward here, one image. You see this little bit of a couplet on the radar imagery. Now, again, in meteorology, the couplet is kind of a term that we use, and that's, where we see kind of reds and greens beginning to kind of mix up against one another. And you can see it right there just to the north of the Alpine Township area. Now, if we look over towards your left here, you notice this little blue dot kind of emerging a little bit. That's an indication that there might actually be a little bit of debris being picked up right around Alpine Township. So this is not what we would consider a strong debris signature. When we talk about much larger tornadoes, we tend to see much more kind of a lower correlation coefficients. Wow. With that, but again, still it's picking up some, and so that's the possibility that there could be a tornado on the ground. And again, you can see we have a little bit of rotation here with the wind directions, winds going away from the radar here, going towards the radar right about there. So not only seeing some gusty winds down to the south, but also seeing what looks to be a little bit of rotation. If we go forward about one or two more scans here, take a look, you're going to kind of start to see it, really becoming evident there. We have much higher values now, and again, this is just north of Plainfield Charter Township. Again, looking north of Grand Rapids, Michigan, and on your left there, you can see a little bit of a debris signature. Now, again, this is not what indicating a very large tornado, but it's certainly really good evidence that there probably was something on the ground right between Alpine Township and going up towards the Plainfield Charter Township area. If we go forward one more scan, you'll see that this signature does not last long. As mentioned in weather, we call this kind of a situation, a spin-up little tornado. It's not on the ground for too long, but it is on the ground long enough that, again, there may have been a brief little tornado. We still have that signature a little bit around the Plainfield Charter Township area. Again, you can see kind of bright values. But at this point, it's likely that the tornado is, maybe reached its peak intensity and it will eventually kind of begin to weaken because if we go forward a couple more radar scans, we can start to see that signature kind of begins to drop off a little bit as it looks like the outflow winds of the storm kind of begin to cut the whole thing off. And there you go. You can see it kind of falling apart a little bit, not quite as defined, and it gets only less defined from there. Interestingly, the debris signature is kind of still showing up a little bit here, but again, some of that was lofted up into the air, so it's going to take a while to kind of fall. And this is probably most likely some leaves and maybe some twigs here and there, and maybe a couple of other things blowing around. Now, the National Weather Service is still in the process of is still actually in the process of surveying this. So it is a suspected tornado at this point. It's we'll probably have an answer maybe at least later on today as to whether or not that was actually a tornado on the ground, and if so, the intensity. But again, that still has to be surveyed. But from what we saw there on those graphics, it did look like that there was probably a tornado not only on the ground, but might have produced maybe a little bit in the way of some damage. So kind of a cool thing there. Again, very brief type of tornado in this type of atmospheric setup that we were seeing yesterday. Not unusual to have sometimes these little spin up tornadoes. And again, we were talking about that last evening. So make sure you tune in tonight on YouTube. We'll be live again for this evening's weather chat. And again, at that point, we probably will have an answer as to whether or not it was a tornado or, maybe how strong it was. We'll talk more about this and also expecting some other strong storms to be a possibility along the Ohio River Valley. So we'll take a look at that too. Plus, we got Franklin out there in the Atlantic Ocean, which is doing a little bit better now. So we'll have the latest update on that. So make sure you tune in at would be about 6 or 6:30 Central Time, maybe about 7:30 over in Eastern Time. And make sure, as always, you bring your questions. Have a good evening, everyone. We'll see you in just a little bit.